Welcome to the shed. I'm Syd, Mackie's on the camera, and today we are going to be learning how to adjust your rear derailleur so that you have perfect shifting on your mountain bike all the time. I just screw and unscrew them all until things get worse. For this task, you will need a 2mm Allen key or a Phillips head screwdriver, a 4mm, 5mm, and your brain. I think everyone has heard this noise or something similar. If it's making a clickety-clackety noise like that, it means the derailleur is confused. I like to anthropomorphize the bike equipment. It thinks it should be in a lower gear, but it's not quite in a lower gear or a higher gear. That's what you have to figure out. Yes. That's where you use your brain. For some reason, these sorts of things just get out of whack. Your cable could stretch out. Like if you just got a new bike or got new cables put on, you ride for a while, like this will probably happen to your shifting.
It can be a sign of the end of your cable and housing's life because the cable and housing might be worn out and you have to replace that. Do you want to talk us through a little bit how a derailleur works? And we're talking about a mechanical, cable-actuated derailleur, not an electronic derailleur.
I'm gonna cede the floor to Lily. Hey, Lily, how does a derailleur work? That clears that up. Basically, there's a cable. Tension is put on the cable, which pulls the derailleur out.
You sound doubtful.
It pulls it one way or the other.
Yes.
Which is why when you break your cable, you're always stuck in your hardest gear.
Okay, if you're stuck in your hardest gear, which way is pulling?
It's pulling it in, I guess.
Okay, so that's shifting easier, which is putting more tension on it, and then going the other way.
Less tension. There's a couple variables here. One is the amount of tension on your cable. So that's one thing that we can change. The other variable is the range that your derailleur is moving, so the start and end point. There's some little screws over here somewhere, your limit screws. So yes. One is the high and one is the low. And I imagine we will learn which one is which today. And then there's this one, which is a mystery to me, but we'll get to that later. I just screw and unscrew them all until things get worse. So the tension is controlled by, first off, where you have attached your cable to your derailleur. And then because bike manufacturers are kind human beings and they know that we don't always get it right, when we put the cable in the thingy, there's also these guys, which are called barrel adjusters.
This is the most common barrel adjuster you'll find on mountain bikes, but on road bikes you usually find them either partway down the shifter cable, coming out of the hoods, or at the point where the cable goes into the rear derailleur.
If you're just riding on the trail, things start going, it's probably not that out of whack, so you should try on your barrel adjuster. This is like the brain part of it, where you have to like think really hard.
Right now, do you know what gear it should be in? So the only way to tell is go to shift to your hardest gear. So Syd is in her hardest gear. Now shift one gear easier. Okay, so it should be one gear from the hardest, but it keeps dropping into the hardest. Which means what?
Don't tell me. I think it means there's not enough tension on the cable because otherwise it would go the other way if it was too much tension.
If there was too much tension, it would go up a gear or easier a gear. First of all, let's just decide on how we're going to talk about it. Instead of calling it low and high, easy, hard. So it's going harder than it should be, which means that
there's not enough tension. Okay, so barrel adjusters to me are just like really have been very hard to wrap my head around because you kind of do the opposite of what you want to happen. That only makes sense to the people it makes sense to, but I'm here for you. Basically, if you want to make there be more tension on the cable, you loosen the barrel adjuster. If you want there to be less tension, you tighten the barrel adjuster.
Do you know why?
I do actually. After 5 years of trying to figure this out, I think I finally understand. I have to go to the other side. Mackie will do this while he's riding the bike. I have to get off the bike, get on the proper side, and look it dead in the eyes. Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, we're loosening it. So you're loosening it, you're backing this out.
So by backing it out, what are you doing?
Pushing the housing backwards, which is stretching the cable.
Yeah, so you're basically making the housing longer.
You're making the path that the cable has to take longer.
Which puts more tension on the cable.
So if you tighten it, you're shortening that path and making the path shorter for the same amount of cable, so looser cable. To tighten the cable, you do the opposite. That's the opposite part.
You unscrew it.
Yeah, it's always opposite day here. Gonna unscrew a lot. I find it's helpful to just go really far in one direction.
And so you
see
want to
what
be
happens.
careful because you don't want to unscrew it all the way. Like if you wiggle this, it looks like it's not actually screwed in anymore.
Uh-oh.
So you should screw it in just a couple turns. There you go. So now what's the plan? You unscrewed it a certain amount.
Now we're gonna see what happens.
Let me tell you a secret for adjusting derailleurs. Instead of shifting one gear up, one gear down, or like one gear up, do 2 gears up, see how it's doing, and then go 1 gear down, and then 2 gears up, and then 1, because then you are moving your way up the cassette, but you're testing both easier and harder at the same time. Seems pretty good. The other thing you can do is if you look at the chain, so this is what it looks like if your cable is slightly too tight. You can see right, this gear right there is basically touching the chain right there. And that's what's causing it when Syd pedals. Hear that click, click noise? That's it trying to shift up another gear when it shouldn't be. So in that case, what does that mean?
We are going to do the opposite of what we did before. So we're going to make the cable looser by tightening this.
By screwing that in is probably the better way to think about it.
Righty-tighty.
Okay, so we're not ticking anymore. And if you look here, it's actually still really close. It's basically touching. So I would probably loosen the cable maybe 2 or 3 more turns. So now there's some space between that chain and the chain ring, and that's what you want. It's in the hardest gear. It has been shifted all the way down, so it should be in the hardest gear, right?
Yep.
Okay, so that's fine, go ahead and pedal. Okay. It stays in that gear, everything's hunky-dory. But now shift 1 gear easier. But the derailleur doesn't move at all, which means that it's an entire gear off. It actually is shifting okay after that, but it means you'll never be able to get into your easiest gear. Right now, if you tried to fix this with the barrel adjuster, what would happen?
It would probably like pop all the way off.
Yeah, you'd basically unscrew the barrel adjuster fully. So instead, we have to tighten there. Although, based on my experience, I would not recommend doing that when it's in the easiest gear. I would do it in the hardest gear, because then you have the least amount of tension, yeah. Just hold the cable and let go of the derailleur. That is probably about where it was previously, right?
Yeah.
So now pull on the cable, and now try tightening it up.
Do not have enough fingers for this. Think that amount was gonna make a difference? I don't think it moved at all.
Well, think about how much it changes when you're twisting a barrel adjuster.
Not that much, so I guess we just see.
Okay, so that's your hardest gear.
Whoa, it won't go into the hardest gear, so I went too far.
Talk us through what you're doing.
I'm loosening it.
Loosening the bolt, letting the cable pull itself back a little bit, and then tightening
I think
again.
it went back a little bit. We'll see. Excellent.
Now if you just do 1 gear, cool.
Zip up and see what's going on the top end. 1, 2, 3. I went 3.
So do the 2 one direction, 1 the other, and try it. Just to... That seems like it's working pretty well. I feel like you just had an epiphany about limit screws.
I literally don't think I understood what limit screws were until like 30 seconds ago. I think the fact that these are controlling a different variable than the tension never really made sense to me, so I didn't know when to do limit screws. It's kind of easy to tell when you need to mess with your limit screws because it's when you're losing your chain off the back or the front.
Or if it will never shift into one of those gears. If you go to your hardest gear, for example, and you shift 1 gear at a time all the way up, and you only get 11 shifts, and you can't get your 12th shift, you're like, something is stopping my derailleur from moving into the easiest gear. But it's not cable because you know you've only shifted 11 times. That would be a limit screw issue. As Syd pointed out, these limit screws don't have high and low marked on them.
And your derailleur may be a screwdriver here.
So if you're in your hardest gear, as you are right now,
right, it's limiting out because it's this one is touching that one.
Yeah, so if you look really carefully here, you can see that this one is not touching anything. So obviously that's gonna be your low limit or your easy limit.
Okay, so they do call low as easy.
Low is easy, not small. So go ahead and shift all the way to the opposite gear, and let's make sure that the low limit is touching at that point, and then you're for sure that that's what's going on. You can see that low limit screw is touching right there.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so you know this is your low and that's your high.
It literally is just a screw that touches the thing. I kind of thought it was like magic, to be honest.
So now tighten your limit screw like a couple turns. Sorry, yeah, the low limit screw.
Because tightening it will make it closer. So now I won't be able to get into my smallest gear, most likely.
And now what happens, like if you're pushing up there, nothing's happening. Yeah, no. So that's because if you look right here, your limit screw is already hitting the stop. And so it's limited out. It's saying like, nope, derailleur's gonna go too far if you go past here.
Yeah.
So how would you fix it?
I would loosen it.
Yes, indeed.
This is like a huge revelation, I'm not gonna lie.
See what happens?
Not quite enough.
Okay, so it's going up, but then it's falling back down. So that's not quite loose enough.
It's much less intimidating to me to mess with these now that I know that it's literally just like a physical process of like this touching that. It seems less likely that I could just horribly mess things up. The thing about understanding things makes you less afraid of messing things up.
If you were to loosen it more, then as you were shifting into that easiest gear, it might just push it beyond the cassette into your spokes. So let's go back to the opposite side of the cassette and play with the high limit screw.
So I don't think I want to even bother with getting it stuck in here. So I think I'm gonna shift up a couple, tighten that, and then the limit will be there. Then I can just go ahead and tighten this all the way to confirm my hypothesis. It still won't go off the other side, so it didn't shift the range, I just did this with the low end.
Exactly, it doesn't shift both sides, it literally only shifts the side that you're on. So if you go back up there, all the way to your easiest gear limit screw's still happy. But then if you shift all the way back down, Okay, so you just shifted a gear and nothing happened.
Yeah, so we're gonna go ahead and pull this guy out.
What you could do here is you just shifted one gear harder and nothing happened. So you could loosen the limit screw until you get that one gear, and then you could shift another gear and see if you get that second gear or not.
I think I did it. I mean, we'll find out, hopefully.
What you can do to just make sure is go ahead and tighten that hard limit screw until you feel some resistance, because then that means it's hitting that little contact point. And then make sure oh, that was too much.
So loosen a tiny bit.
Yeah. There we go. Looks happy to me.
So if your chain falls off between the frame and the cassette, what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna dig your chain out of this stupid spot, put it back on this hardest gear, and then take a look at these limit screws. And one of them will be a lot closer to touching something than the others, and that's the one that you will want to essentially look at it and tighten it until it is touching something.
Yes, and that will keep it in the gear that it's currently on.
Which is what you want because you're there. The opposite side, if you overshift easier, drop your chain between your wheel and your cassette, really a bummer. Dig the chain out between the wheel of the cassette, put it on your biggest, easiest cog, and then repeat that. And then one of these screws will be very close to something, but not touching it, and you want to screw it down until it's touching it.
That was a very succinct summary. The last thing that you might need to adjust on a derailleur, that is this one right here. And if you look at it, it basically is the screw that changes how like rotated upward the derailleur is when it's pressing against the derailleur hanger.
So if this is your problem, what are the symptoms?
What you might find if somebody's bike is having issues getting into the easiest gear is that their B index is totally off and therefore they can't actually get into their easiest gear because it doesn't have the clearance between that cog and the cassette. Go ahead and loosen that screw like 3 turns.
Ooh, saggy chain.
So we lost some chain tension. That's one thing. That honestly can be multiple things. That could be that your chain is just too long. Okay, and stop there. Now come to this other side of the bike. You see how this is touching that big ring, or like very close to, and there's some rub marks on there, some wear marks.
Can we just do that right now?
I think we may have. As you tighten it, it pushes this back, which creates space between the top of the derailleur there and the teeth. The way that you adjust this B index is go all the way to the easiest gear. Each derailleur will have a different measurement between the top tooth of the cog and the bottom tooth of the cassette ring. And for this derailleur, the 12-speed Shimano derailleur, it's like a little over a centimeter. So right now we're looking at probably 3/4 of a centimeter. So we could tighten it up. And as Syd tightens it, you can see it moving farther away. So that looks pretty good. Now, if you shift down one gear, you can see we are nowhere close to touching that tooth on the top of the derailleur.
This is how you adjust your derailleur for perfect shifting in under 1 minute.
If your derailleur is skipping in multiple places or in the middle of the cassette, try adjusting your cable tension. If it is jumping into an easier gear, you have too much cable tension, so tighten the barrel adjuster to loosen the cable. If it is jumping into a harder gear, loosen the barrel adjuster for more cable tension. If it feels like it might be an entire gear off, tighten or loosen the cable at the bolt and then fine-tune with the barrel adjuster. If you are dropping your chain off either side of the cassette or are unable to get into your highest or lowest gears, you will need to adjust your limit screws. Adjust the high limit screw so that it is touching the stop when you're in your hardest gear, and the low limit screw so that it is touching the stop when you're in the easiest gear. If you've tried both these adjustments and are still having issues, especially in easier gears, check your B tension screw and adjust until the derailleur pulley wheel is the suggested distance from the cassette.